Empire Energy, we've got two sets of assets. We've got a very large acreage holding in the Northern Territory in the Beetaloo and MacArthur Basins. We also have a non-core legacy asset holding in the US. Just yesterday, Matt Canavan spoke to the Australian newspaper, speaking from the Permian Basin. He sees these basins that we're in as having the potential to be as big as the Permian Basin in the US, which has really been transformational on their oil and gas sector and their overall economy. Recently, a new regulatory framework has come into place, which has allowed a recommencement of activity in the industry. And there are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested by our neighbours, Santos and Origin, appraising some enormous discoveries. We are the most active amongst the juniors up there. We've just completed a seismic program and we'll be drilling next year. As Grossy mentioned, we're going into trading halt this morning. We'll be raising $12 million at 40 cents a share. That will be to fund our drilling program for next year and ensure that we don't have to come back to the market until well into 2021. Quick overview, we've gone through a huge transformation over the last 12 months, so the board is entirely new. I used to work at Macquarie Bank in the oil and gas financing business for 9 years. So we were the business that provided loans to companies like Central Petroleum, tried to buy Central, own half of the Mereenie field. So we had a deep insight into the oil and gas sector. John Warburton is on our board. He is the technical guy who identified the potential of this basin. He also sits on the board of Cenex. Paul Espy is our chairman. He was the founder of Pacific Road Capital. He's been involved on the board of a number of similar stories that have been very successful, such as Oxiana, and he's on the board of Aurelia. And John Geraghty was one of the founders of Macquarie Bank. Between all of us, we own over 7% of the company, which we've bought in cash over the last 18 months, and we intend to continue to add to our holdings over time. Our biggest shareholder is Macquarie. They've been very supportive. Another one of our major holders is Dale Elphinstone, who was one of the early backers of Queensland Gas, and that was a very successful investment for him. We expect continued strong support from Elphinstone over time. Our share price has gone up quite significantly recently, but we believe that's entirely justified. At the end of September, we completed the sale of an asset in Kansas, which dramatically reduced our debt from $25 million US to $7.5 US, and improved our cash at bank. Also, over the last month, we carried out a seismic program. So we were the first junior in these basins to get boots on the ground. Origin has started drilling a fracked horizontal well, and they'll be drilling another fracked horizontal well around Christmas. Santos has started fracking an existing well, and they're going to drill 2 big fracked horizontals next year. Santos has invested in Armour Energy at the asset level recently, and also Santos has announced a deal to buy ConocoPhillips out of Northern Australia for 2 billion Aussie dollars, including buying them out of the Darwin LNG export terminals. So Santos now has an export route to Asia for these basins. So there's been a lot of news flow quite recently, but I think critically there's going to be massive news flow coming out of these basins over the next 15 months to appraise major discoveries that have already been made. Our history is in oil and gas, and we have been involved in the shale space for a long time. So our first acquisition was in Pennsylvania, and after we bought that asset, the Marcellus Shale exploded onto the map. It's now over 30% of US gas production, and we sold those shale assets at a substantial profit, and we were really one of the pioneers to look for shale outside of the US, which gave us our commanding asset position. As I mentioned, we've been through a huge transformation. So when I joined the company, we had $38 million US dollars of debt, less than $1 million in the bank, against quite low EBITDA. We have reduced net debt by about 90% in the last 18 months. We've got a new board, and we're getting on with the job of adding value to our assets. We have an enormous prospective resource. So we've got 13 TCF equivalent of P50 prospective resource. Obviously, there's a long way to go to convert it to proved and probable reserves, but we're getting on with that. So seismic was the first step. Then we'll be drilling an exploration well next year with a view to booking resources and reserves. Shale basins inherently have enormous resources in place, and they've really transformed the US economy. and we have the opportunity to replicate that here in Australia. Just to give you a bit of an indication of what impact it has had on the US, so this is shale gas production in the US, so it's really gone from a standing start to now over 70% of US gas production. And on the oil side, over 60% of oil in the US comes from shales now. It's also had a very positive impact on CO2 emissions in the power generation sector because it's really displaced coal as a major source of baseline power generation. Our tenement holding is in the yellow. We have 14.5 million acres of land, so it's about 600 k's from north to south. We have two major play types. One is called the Barney Creek Shale. That's a geology that Armour Energy drilled back in 2012, and they got some really good flow rates. We actually have much better geology than them in our northern tenements. That's an enormous prospective resource in its own right. However, we are going to focus our initial attention on the southernmost tenement, EP187. The reason we're doing that is it's highly prospective for the Velkerri Shale. We know that we have Velkerri Shale in our tenement because we have reviewed Santos seismic lines that go up to our tenement boundary. We can see that it's 1,800 metres deep at the top of the Velkerri on our tenement boundary. And also there's an old mineral core hole, MD4, in our tenement that was in the Velkerri Shale down to its target depth of 350 metres. The seismic that we've done is in that tenement and will fill out the story of how the shales move through our tenement, and then we'll be drilling a well next year to take a full suite of logs and take core from the Velkerri Shale. That is immediately adjacent to the light blue area, which is Santos's core work program area, where they have made a major discovery, a well called Tanumbirini 1. They're fracking that well right now, and then they're going to be drilling two fracked horizontals, one right next to it, and the other one's coming towards us. Origin's in the red. They are drilling a well right now called Kyala 117. That's a fracked horizontal. The second well will be coming right over towards our side of the basin on their tenements to test the liquids-rich portion of the Velkerri Shale, so a very similar depth and thermal maturity to our targets. Also, other major players in the basin include Hancock Prospecting and Inpex. Inpex was recently awarded the Purple Tenement. They invested $43 billion with Total building the Ichthys LNG project, which is an LNG export terminal out of Darwin that provides Japan with 10% of its natural gas. So it's often overlooked in Australia that Darwin is already a major LNG export hub, and that is expected to ramp up materially with the development of this basin. I might just quickly move on to our targets. So that area in the red on the right-hand side of the page is our core work program area, where we've just carried out seismic. The seismic program looks like that. So we've done 6 seismic lines over 231 line kilometres. We're processing and interpreting that seismic at the moment, and early indications are very promising. That will inform us about the drilling of a well next year. We are currently in conversations with our neighbours in the basin about sharing a rig with them, which would substantially reduce mobilisation and demobilisation costs, and expect to drill sometime in the middle of next year. The purpose of this capital raising will be to fully fund that program, and also, as I mentioned, ensure that we have sufficient working capital that we don't have to come back to market for the next couple of years.